In our last session, we covered the three keys to escaping the time for money trap: automation, collaboration, and delegation. And we briefly overviewed them, and we said we'd jump in and take a little more in depth look at each of these three sections. So today I'm going to cover automation, okay, and that's the A in the ACD, obviously. Okay, so when automating your practice, obviously there are a ton of options out there. There's probably already some element of automation that you're using in your existing practice, whether it be an EHR, whether it be automated scheduling system integrated into your EHR or some component. But what we can do, rather than getting super granular, we're going to talk about automation in the context of how it simplifies your workflow and how it can scale your practice outside of those four walls while buying back your time and reducing your headache and overhead and enabling you to run a successful practice without your ongoing participation. Or rather, with you managing the level of ongoing participation you have, and up to and including being able to walk away, spend your time in the way that you choose, and invest it in the way you choose without affecting the profitability of your practice. So we're going to dive right in. So essentially, we're going to break the practice into three sections. And so that'll be the inputs into your practice, the overall operations, and the outputs to your practice. And so the ins, the operations, and the outs. And so the simplest way to break down the operative processes of your practice is in these three sections. So when we look at the inputs, we can look at where you're advertising, or rather where your patients are coming from, right? So we can look at things like advertising. Sorry, we can look at advertising. We can look at marketing efforts if you're connected with a marketer. Push this up a little bit. We can look at referrals. And when you add telemedicine as an element of automation, what it does is it optimizes these channels. It doesn't complicate your life. And so we're going to take a look at that in terms of how it simplifies your life and your practice. In terms of operations, we're going to look at what happens when you see patients. So it's the process of seeing patients. It's a mechanism for scheduling. It's a mechanism for treatment in terms of therapies, whether they're on-site or peripheral, whether they're diagnostics, etc. Like, what are the mechanisms for those? And those are all well-traveled. I'm sure if you're running a practice, you already have an idea what those are. Now, when we look at outputs, we're going to look at those things of like prescriptions. We're going to look at patient outcomes. Horrible handwriting. We're going to look at rescheduling. And then we're going to look at something that typically you may not think about: physical goods or products. Okay, and we don't want to get too granular because we don't want this to be an extra long video. But today we're just going to cover the inputs. So we're going to cover those elements that affect the inputs for your practice. So largely in terms of patient advertising, marketing, referrals, and how we handle those. Okay. So we look at the inputs into your practice and how automation can assist in managing those. Primarily, it's going to be, the primary input is going to be patients. Can't run a practice without patients, right? And so how do we acquire those patients? Typically, it's advertising or marketing. Now, how can automation help our practice or optimize our practice for the patient input via advertising marketing? Well, let's look at speed, because we want to escape the time for money trap. So for instance, when a patient sees an ad, right, they have a couple options. Now, depending on the type of practice you run, they can go to your website or a landing page, and they'll click on some sort of which will offer them some sort of incentive, whether it be to book an appointment or it's a value add option like a coupon or a therapy or treatment, right? What you may have done is you might have some value add in terms of a free resource. That's supposed to be a V and an A for everybody who's looking at my horrible handwriting. And so we now have those inputs into the practice, right? And they're available, but how do we, after the patient has engaged, how do we speed things up? How do we optimize so that we're moving even faster and it's more functional and effective? Okay, great. Well, with telemedicine as an automation, what we're doing is we're optimizing their decision making process, and we're shortening the time excuse me, from intent to execution. For instance, they can go straight from that ad to our telemedicine landing page, and they can immediately book an appointment. Now, we talked about collaborative practice before. If you have a practice extender, whether it be a PA or an APN, etc., that's horrible handwriting. Now the patient can actually go ahead and schedule an appointment depending on availability right away. They can go ahead and schedule an appointment and be seen. So if you've gone from the cost of an ad or an ad, you've gone from an ad to nearly immediately being seen or the ability to schedule an appointment, all without the involvement of anyone within your practice. So by automating that process, they land on the landing page, they see the ad, they land on the landing page, and they immediately can schedule an appointment. They fill out all of the necessary documentation. So at EMedicine Healthcare, using our telemedicine solution, they can go ahead and all your patient documentation and forms are automatically sent to them once they choose their appointment slot. They fill out the appointment form. They pay. They make payment at time of scheduling just to confirm their appointment. In the States, if it's private insurance, or in Canada, if you have some sort of copay, what normally you would charge for an appointment cancellation, typically around $100. They can go ahead and pay that to secure their appointment. The documentation is sent to them automatically. They can sign via DocuSign, and boom, we're ready to go. So immediately, that process going from an advertisement to an actual landing page, to the patient self-scheduling, to documentation being sent to them, and copies being sent to your practice, automatically results in a seamless process. Now, there's no requirement for a human to be involved in this until they've made payment, and you can either have your practice call to confirm or you can simply have reminders sent to them for the appointments. The upside of this entire process is that we now see, automation has helped us increase speed, and we know from our previous sessions that time is our enemy. The time it takes for a patient to travel, the time it takes to run an appointment, the time it takes you as a physician to see that patient, etc., check them out. Our staff may be chasing documentation or billing. All of that is eliminated through this process. So we can see that automation has simplified that in terms of speed. Now, these are the inputs into our practice. And so I'm going to go over this again because we might have rushed through that, but let's talk about the inputs. So our input channels are pretty clear. So our inputs are pretty clear. They're advertising, marketing, and referrals, largely. Okay? And so that all generates patient volume. Now, we've all seen those advertisements. We can bring you 30,000 patients. We can increase your revenue by this much, and we won't charge you any additional revenue, etc. But that all takes time. time to manage the results of these inputs, which are patient appointments. By using automation, when we automate the patient-facing elements of our intakes or inputs, we're able to automate scheduling. We're able to automate patients completing documentation. We're able to automate and confirm payment, which is one of the most critical elements, because think about how many man hours and dollars we burn on billing. That's all to secure an appointment. Now, our concern becomes less in terms of volume, because that allows us to manage all of the patient-facing, the consistent, measurable, and repeatable elements of our overall process that we might otherwise outsource to our team. Those are automated to help us increase their productivity when they're not chasing paperwork because it's been automatically sent to the patient. They've signed it before the appointment. As soon as they sign it via DocuSign, it comes straight into our AHR and or into our new patient email, into our new patient inbox, or an email that we designated as an inbox for new patient documentation. We don't have to worry about the pay piece because they paid to secure the appointment. So many of these elements have been automated for us. So not only are we saving our own time, we're running a more efficient practice as a result of this automation piece. And this is just a small part, not to get too granular, but this is just an example of how using a resource like eMedicine Healthcare or telemedicine in general allows us to triage those patients. And using advertising linked with that, we're allowed to, or we have the ability to attract our ideal patients. It also allows us to increase the efficiency of our practice on the front end. And that's the most critical part. When we're able to increase efficiency on the front end in the beginning, then this allows us to save time downstream. We're not chasing documentation. If we have a cancellation or no-show, we have the capacity to have the system send automatic reminders to reschedule, to ping one of our team members, our scheduler or our admin, to contact them automatically. That spot is also now available, and it shows up on our availability in terms of new patients coming in to schedule for appointments. So this allows the patients, whether we have a backlog or not, to have an awareness of that as an opportunity or as an option. And that all is front-facing and available to them when they're scheduling appointments. So this is actually pretty critical. Now, the automation has multiple, obviously, applications and a high degree of utility. But in this context, we're simply talking about the most basic input into your practice and how automation is now saving you time. The next piece we'll talk about is delegation, and we'll talk about that in the next session.